Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Abhineet Shukla, and with me is Prashant Kumar Sinha, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. World community joins United States to mourn 20th anniversary of 9/11 terror attacks on Saturday. United Nations calls for a future without terrorism. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says India's human values can bring lasting solution to tragedies like 9/11 terror attack. Foreign and Defence Ministers of India and Australia hold 2+2 ministerial dialogue emphasized to work for a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. India's Medicines from the Sky project launched to send medicines to primary healthcare centers using drones. And in US Open Tennis, Emma Raducanu of Britain to take on Canada's Leylah Fernandez in all-teenager title clash of women's singles on Sunday. As the nationwide free COVID-19 vaccination campaign at government facilities for those above 18 years is underway, we advise our young listeners to get vaccinated and help others get vaccinated. We also advise our listeners not to lower their guard as COVID-19 remains a threat to our health. Please stay at home unless it is essential to go out and continue to follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact National Helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. The United States is mourning the 20th anniversary of 9/11 terror attacks on Saturday. World community has joined in this grief. US is remembering the dead, invoking the heroes and taking stock of the aftermath of the deadliest terror attack on its soil. The ceremony at Ground Zero in New York began exactly 2 decades after the attack started with the first of 4 hijacked planes crashing into one of the World Trade Center's Twin Towers. President Joe Biden is also scheduled to pay respects at the 2 other sites where the 9/11 conspirators crashed the jets, the Pentagon and a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Later, a war on terror led to invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, where the longest US war ended last month with a hasty, massive airlift. The United Nations remembers the solidarity, unity and resolve expressed 2 decades ago by the international community for a future without terrorism. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that we mark a somber day seared in the minds of millions of people around the world. He said it is a day when nearly 3,000 lives from over 90 countries were taken by terrorists in cowardly and heinous attacks in the United States of America.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that we should continue our efforts to protect human values. He said this while inaugurating the Sardar Dham Bhavan at Ahmedabad through video conferencing on Saturday. Referring to the 9/11 terror attack in 2001, the Prime Minister said, "This date in world history is known for the attack on humanity, but this date also taught a lot to the whole world." He said that a century ago, in 1893, Swami Vivekananda introduced the world to the human values of India at the World Parliament of Religions held in Chicago.
आज 11 सितंबर यानी 9/11 है। दुनिया के इतिहास की एक ऐसी तारीख जिसने मानवता पर प्रहार के लिए भी जाना जाता है, लेकिन इसी तारीख ने पूरे विश्व को काफी कुछ सिखाया भी। 1 सदी पहले ये 11 सितंबर 1893 का ही दिन था जब शिकागो में विश्व धर्म संसद का आयोजन हुआ था। आज के ही दिन स्वामी विवेकानंद ने उस वैश्विक मंच पर खड़े होकर दुनिया को भारत के मानवीय मूल्यों से परिचित कराया था।
The word 9/11 invokes in our memories the events that sent shockwaves around the world 20 years ago. It showed the ugly head of terror aided and abetted in the name of radical Islam by the Al-Qaeda. Let us recall what happened in 2001 on this very day. We have a report.
2 decades ago on this very day, 19 Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 aircraft in the United States with a sinister design. 2 aircraft crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York, while one of them crashed into the Pentagon outside Washington. The 4th plane crashed into rural Pennsylvania as the passengers tried to take back the control from the hijackers. 2,977 people were killed in these dastardly attacks, raising the specter of terrorism. Most of those killed were American nationals, but citizens of more than 100 countries lost their lives as well. The mastermind behind these attacks was the founder of the terror outfit Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. The irony is that most of these hijackers were of Saudi origin. All were trained in Afghanistan, and 4 of them had received training at the flight training schools in the United States. The incident led to global outrage, with the then U.S. President George Bush calling for a global war on terror. U.S. troops were sent to Afghanistan under the Operation Enduring Freedom, which led to the ouster of the then regime in Kabul. Terrorists were hunted down and Osama bin Laden was killed a decade later on the 2nd of May 2011 in Pakistan's Abbottabad. The concerted move by the global community over 20 years has exposed the nefarious designs of terrorists and underlined the need to weed out the menace of terrorism. Versa Williams, News Desk, World News.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on how the world has changed after 9/11. In conversation are former Ambassador Anil Kumar Tigunayad and journalist Simran Sodhi.
Today we are discussing how the world has changed after the events of 9/11. We have seen that in these last 20 years, the world has changed in terms of security concerns and how countries respond to terrorist attacks. Ambassador Tigunayad, when you look back at the events of 9/11 and we see the world changing in the sense that we are all more acutely aware of our security concerns as nation states, what is the biggest change that you see globally today?
It was shocking, really. Nobody could believe at the time that now that is something that has changed US dramatically. It has changed the world the way it looks dramatically, because what one is seeing is that these terrorist groups turned into very big syndicates. They have connectivities across the world. But the problem is that until then, the Western world had not realized what really the terrorism is. They were playing with the fire themselves. India had been suffering from this cross-border terrorism from Pakistan. Everybody knew that there are havens of terrorism there. And that country does use terrorism or cross-border terrorism as an instrument of its foreign policy. But nobody ever bothered about it. But at that time, at least, then they started realizing that, yes, this is a real problem. Because then the United States got the hit. And then we know what happened in Afghanistan. They went in 2001 chasing them. Then President Bush said, we will smoke them out. And then 2 years later, they went to Iraq in 2003, created a bogey of WMDs and attacked Iraq, dislodged the Saddam Hussein's regime there. What is the result of that? The world has definitely become far more sensitive and worried about terrorist activities that are happening all over. More and more people have begun to know the names Jaish Muhammad or Boko Haram or ISIS or Daesh or Al-Qaeda and all. You think about it, not only that we have seen the mushrooming of these groups, and these groups have become far, far more lethal in their approaches, and their outreach has become far more stronger. Their radicalization schemes have become far more effective. Very often these non-state actors are able to strike far more effectively than the proper state actors can even respond to, because they have a surprise element. They use guerrilla tactics. They use sleeper cells. They are able to manipulate the opinion of the vulnerable classes on the basis of religion. We have seen how the Al-Qaeda grew and how the Daesh, which is called ISIS, has really become so strong that really the Americans, the Russians, everybody had to fight together to decimate them. But they were not ended, because there has to be a comprehensive plan to how to de-radicalize people, how to make them become less attractive to those who are being targeted by them. Second thing I have seen is that these groups, especially these groups which have the terror linkages or indulge in terrorism, are able to use the media tools, social media especially, far more effectively than the other people can do it, the counterpart. So it is the challenge which has remained a bigger challenge. And in my view, why it is the bigger challenge? Everybody is discussing terrorism. But the problem is that a lot of the time the people believed in a good terrorist and a bad terrorist, good cause and a bad cause. Disenfranchised people can rise. Now, do you justify terrorism for any end? So that has been the biggest problem, and that has been the biggest source of discord and the reason that the global fight against terrorism could not ensue. You will be surprised that Prime Minister Modi, when he went to United Nations Security Council, in a UN meeting last time, 2015, he mentioned that till that day, till now also, the definition of terrorism has not been done. Nobody agrees to a single definition. For decades now, India has submitted something called Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism that has not passed in the United Nations Security Council or in the United Nations itself. And the whole world talks about terrorism. So when we have double standards, on the one hand, you have a country about whom you know that it is indulging in terrorism. It is using terrorism effectively against India, against Afghanistan before. And then you are only working with them. On the one hand, you say Taliban was a terrorist group. On the other hand, you are signing agreements with them. You are enabling them to come into power. Now, if that kind of a situation and a global ecosystem exists, I'm wondering if we can be able to fight terrorism as a global fight, because it's a global problem. It is a modern problem, and in 21st century, because of these unilateral interventions by powerful countries, we are going to see a growth of these rather than the reduction in them, because there does not seem to be any strategy anywhere in the world as to how to counter this growth of terrorism. So I think that 20 years in this sense of the term may be a realization, but action, no. Of course, Americans can say that, okay, we control completely, curtail the freedoms, we have controlled our systems in the United States, and then we did not have any major problem. But then what has happened, that the growth of the whole of Middle East has been suffering because of that. South Asia is suffering, Africa is suffering, and you have a problem of terrorists roaming around all over the world. And they have become sort of together, as I say, a syndicate, so they all support one another whenever they come under problems. And they have learned how to create different groups in different places. So deterritorializing themselves. Now today you have ISIS Khorasan in Afghanistan. You have ISIS in Libya. There's a separate. There's an ISIS for South Asia, which is different. So they have now started making the localized kind of thing, yet connected in this manner with in a centrifugal way.
Ambassador Trugnath, as you explained in detail, as we have seen the world changing in these last 20 years, we have also seen various terrorist organizations, and you pointed out many examples of how they have evolved globally into different outfits. My question is that when we look at Afghanistan today, and we see in the last almost 1 month now, we see the Taliban takeover of the country, and the Taliban, as you had also pointed out, were always regarded to be a terrorist organization, and now we actually have a nation state that would be run by them. How do you see these changes which are happening in Afghanistan? How do you see this affecting the way we deal with terror globally, and especially for a country like India, for which this becomes an even acute problem?
You know, Afghanistan is a worrying factor for India because this is our neighborhood, it's a part of the SAARC, it's a part of the SCO, and whatever happens there, plus more importantly, we have been heavily invested in the people of Afghanistan for the last 20 years. Not only through projects, but at the P2P level. India is the only country which has been engaged there in nation building. And that is going to be our saving grace, I tell you. Because every other country which is going there is more importantly going for geopolitical reasons, or Pakistan, which is seeking the geostrategic depth in Afghanistan. Now, when Afghans, the Taliban and various other groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS Khorasan or the Pakistani groups which are based in Afghanistan, they have been fighting against the Western countries for the last 20 years. The Americans' only role was that somehow to counter terrorism was their main objective, and they achieved that after 10 years when they say they killed. But then they are the ones started talking to Taliban in 2018 or even before. In 2020, President Trump signed an agreement with Taliban, not with the government of Afghanistan there, which they have been supporting all along. So what they have done, they have enabled Taliban onset on the basis of the assurances they received from them verbally, number one, that Taliban will not allow Afghan territory to be used against terrorists. It will allow the freedoms to the people to the extent it is permissible within their laws, whether it's Sharia or whatever. And they will not indulge into execution of the opposition or those forces which are ruled earlier. That's all very well. But what happens is that Taliban is also not a monolith organization. Today's government, as you know, which has been formed out of the 33, there are so many of them, including the head of the government, who are UN listed in the terrorist groups. They are sanctioned. So many ministers, the Haqqani group, which is actually a surrogate of Pakistan. Pakistan has become the most powerful constituent of this group. Now, when that kind of a situation exists, so suppose even 1% you give a benefit of doubt to Mullah Baradar and those creamy layer of the Taliban. Now, Mullah Baradar has become the number 2, not number 1. And number 1, the Prime Minister himself is a US designated terrorist. So how are they going to work? This is the thing. Their Interior Minister, Haqqani Sirajuddin, he has a $5 million booty on him, and he is a designated terrorist. So how are they going to interact with the world or the international community is something extremely difficult for one to understand. And more importantly, apart from their other domestic challenges like economy or the disenchantment the people are facing, I worry about what they will do with the groups like Al-Qaeda, which are on their own. ISIS Khorasan, which is on their own, and their objectives are very different and sometimes opposed to that of Taliban. So even if, let us say, Taliban wanted to control them, does it have the necessary wherewithal or the capacities or even the willpower to contain them? No, I don't think so. In addition, you have these Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba and all kinds of groups spawning out of Pakistan and going there and working with them. They will all be now coming back into, when they come to Pakistan, what will they do? They will go back to the borders in India. And today, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever you may say for them, they have got the best of the equipment which was left by the US forces. And that equipment makes them, as some analysts say, the fourth strongest army in terms of equipment. Now, with those kind of equipment, if they are coming here, then you have a problem on your border vis-a-vis the simple fight against the terrorist group. But India's position has changed. I mean, that is something like it has become more like the Western position, that of the Americans, who have been using drone attacks and all that across the Afghan-Pakistan border, and they have been hitting all along wherever the terrorist groups are there. So India has also started striking these terror groups, whether it was Balakot or Uri or whatever it is, across wherever the terrorists exist. So we will have to not only fight against the individual terrorist groups, but we'll also have to fight against a possibility of greater radicalization within India. With the victory of some of these terrorist constituents of Taliban, I think that is going to enhance, and we might have a little more bigger challenges for us, apart from the fact that Afghanistan will remain unstable for some time.
Ambassador Trungnath, do you feel that the fact 9/11 happened and suddenly terrorism became a global concern, do you feel that that has helped India put across its table at various global forums where India has repeatedly said that Pakistan sponsors cross-border terrorism and the global community needs to take that more seriously? Do you believe that the world got a jolt and a shock on 9/11 and now globally the world is more receptive to India's concern when we talk at various forums about this?
Until 9/11, they did not take India seriously. But when it hit them themselves, the Western countries set up, and then they started realizing what the problem is. But the geopolitical convenience of theirs has not prevented the countries that are indulging in terrorism somehow or the other. So that is their biggest setback, in my view, to the cause of fighting terrorism globally. And as far as India is concerned, India makes it a point, and it has got into all our bilateral discussions with any country or in the international fora or in the United Nations. India is pushing for some kind of a UN thing as far as its comprehensive convention of international terrorism is concerned.
With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Analysts have pointed out that Pakistan has been hedging its bets over Afghanistan and the Taliban. After the 9/11 attacks that were planned in Afghanistan, Pakistan positioned itself as an ally of the US in the so-called war on terror. But at the same time, parts of the country's military and intelligence establishment maintained links with Islamic groups in Afghanistan like the Taliban. Those links at times turned into significant material and logistical support. These views have been expressed by C. Christine Fair, a professor at the Georgetown University in Washington. She says Washington has an endless appetite for Islamabad's con games. Pakistan's interests in Afghanistan have deep roots, as the country's hardliners have funneled support to the Taliban for decades, and they can now envision their allies firmly ensconced in Kabul. Pakistan got what it wished for, but will come to regret it. Her take is that the return of the Taliban in Kabul will leave Pakistan more vulnerable to extremism at home and potentially more isolated on the world stage. Professor Christine Fair adds that if the global community does not declare Pakistan a state sponsor of terrorism, it should get Islamabad at least blacklisted by the Financial Action Task Force. The FATF is the global body that evaluates corruption, money laundering and terrorist funding in national financial systems. The grapevine is that the US and the United Kingdom have unofficially preferred that Pakistan remain on the organization's grey list to ensure that it can continue to receive IMF funding. Professor Christine Fair writes that Washington and its partners must focus on ameliorating the humanitarian disaster that the US and Pakistan have created. The international community must demand that Pakistan provide a safe corridor for those Afghans who do not want to live shackled to the horrors of the Taliban regime. It must provide safe passage even to those Afghans who worked in the legitimate government and who may be viewed as enemies of Pakistan and its Taliban leaders. Pakistan could be compensated for these services via a cost structure instead of the coalition's support funds program. There should be harsh punishment for failing to protect Afghans or facilitate their resettlement elsewhere. Islamabad must be persuaded to put pressure on the Taliban to let the planes that are currently stranded in Afghanistan's airports depart. She adds that at the same time, the US must take steps to punish Pakistan for its ongoing military and other support to the Taliban, the Haqqani network and other Islamist militants it uses at home and abroad. It is also an irony that the Taliban interim cabinet includes declared terrorist Sirajuddin Haqqani, head of the Haqqani terror network, as the new acting interior minister, as well as numerous others who are on various American and UN sanctions lists. It is no longer a secret that Islamabad has been aiding and abetting the terror outfits. Its constant meddling in Afghanistan's affairs is there to see for all. A clear example is the presence of ISI chief in Kabul before the interim government formation. It is high time that the United States should also declare Pakistan a state sponsor of terrorism with clearly defined benchmarks according to which the status can be reversed. Currently, the State Department designates Cuba, North Korea, Iran and Syria as terrorism sponsors. Reports say the Taliban have cancelled the inauguration ceremony of their newly formed interim government in Afghanistan. The ceremony was reportedly to be held today, the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. New York Times reports, amid a painful year, United States remember the deadliest attack in history. US Today recalls on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, America honors the memory of those who were lost. The Guardian reports that US President Joe Biden has joined survivors and families as US marks 20 years since terror attacks. Washington Post says US reflects and mourns on 20-year anniversary of September 11 terrorist attack. Wall Street Journal says America marks 20th anniversary of 9/11 with memorial. This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has said that as two democracies, India and Australia's common interest lies in the peace and prosperity of the entire region. Briefing media after India-Australia 2+2 dialogue in New Delhi on Saturday, Mr. Singh said he and External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar held comprehensive discussions with Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne and Minister Peter Dutton over bilateral and regional issues. He said the ministers also discussed different institutional frameworks for defence cooperation and cooperation in the fight against the pandemic. Mr. Singh said both sides exchanged views on Afghanistan, maritime security in Indo-Pacific, multilateral cooperation and other matters. He said both sides also emphasized on rules-based order and agreed to maintain high-level engagement. Mr. Singh said India-Australia partnership is based on shared vision of free, open, inclusive, prosperous Indo-Pacific region. Dr. S. Jaishankar said India and Australia discussed future collaboration to deal with COVID-19 pandemic. He said decentralized globalization, strategic autonomy and a sharper sense of national security are some of the relevant outcomes.
During the 2+2 dialogue, we also exchanged views on developments in our neighboring regions. Afghanistan was understandably a major subject of discussion. We agreed that the international community must be united in its approach, guided by UN Security Council Resolution 2593. As members of the Quad, we recognize the importance of plurilateralism in a multipolar and rebalanced world. We appreciate the value of our trilaterals with Japan, France and Indonesia and will hold these dialogues soon. The importance of ongoing cooperation in multilateral arena for preserving the rules-based international order was also emphasized. Our cooperation in the Commonwealth is important to that organization's performance.
The External Affairs Minister said, today is the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and it's a reminder of importance of combating terrorism without compromise. He said Quad is a platform where 4 countries, India, Australia, Japan and US, have come to cooperate for their benefit and world's benefit. Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne said Australia and India share a positive vision of free, open and secure Indo-Pacific. Ms. Payne said terrorism is a major threat to both sides. She said both nations share strong interests in ensuring that Afghan never again becomes safe haven for breeding, training of terrorists. She said during the 2+2 dialogue, both nations shared views on challenges of South China Sea and East China Sea.
India's Union Minister for Civil Aviation, Jyotiraditya Scindia, has launched medicines from the sky at Vikarabad in Telangana state. The drones carry payload of vaccines and other medicines to public health centers under the project. The first of its kind in the country that will test the delivery of medicines using the drone sorties beyond the visual line of sight at 500 meters. The first sortie was carried out by a drone built by Sky Air Mobility for its consortium partner Blue Dart Express and delivered a 5-kilogram box of vaccines to a community health center located 3 kilometers away. Speaking about the project on the occasion, Telangana IT Minister K. Taraka Ramarao said life-saving drugs, vaccines and blood could easily be transported to places beating traffic and other hurdles. Assam Governor Professor Jagdish Mukhi has said that education is an important sector where India and Bangladesh can work more collaboratively. He requested the High Commissioner of India to Bangladesh, Vikram Doraiswamy, to lay more emphasis on student exchange and cultural exchange programs between the two countries. Interacting with the High Commissioner when he called on him on Friday, the Governor also requested to focus on special digital connectivity and bandwidth facilities for northeastern states and link up with the Internet Gateway at Cox's Bazar.
In US Open tennis, rising British sensation Emma Raducanu will meet Canada's Leylah Fernandez in an all-teenager title clash of women's singles tomorrow morning. The 18-year-old Raducanu made history by becoming the first player to come through qualifying to reach a women's singles Grand Slam final in the professional era after beating 17th seed Maria Sakkari of Greece 6-1, 6-4 in the semi-final. The 19-year-old Leylah Fernandez defeated Aryna Sabalenka 7-6, 4-6, 6-4 in another semi-final. In men's singles, top seed Novak Djokovic defeated Tokyo Olympic champion Alexander Zverev to set up summit clash against second seed Daniil Medvedev. In a tense and nail-biting semi-final clash this morning, Djokovic ousted the German fourth seed 4-6, 6-2, 6-4, 4-6, 6-2 and reached the brink of completing the first men's singles calendar year Grand Slam since 1969. One more victory will give the 34-year-old Serbian star the first calendar year slam since Rod Laver did it 52 years ago. A quick look at the headlines once again. World community joins United States to mourn 20th anniversary of 9/11 terror attacks on Saturday. United Nations calls for a future without terrorism. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says India's human values can bring long-lasting solution to tragedies like 9/11 terror attacks. Foreign and Defence Ministers of India and Australia hold 2+2 ministerial dialogue emphasized to work for a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. India's Medicines from the Sky project launched to send medicines to primary healthcare centers using drones. And in US Open tennis, Emma Raducanu of Britain to take on Canada's Leylah Fernandez in all-teenager title clash of women's singles on Sunday. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Bhutan. with that, we end this bulletin. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.